He came home early that day, not knowing his life would change forever. What he witnessed when he opened that door would haunt him for years to come. The ending to this family's ordeal would leave everyone who heard their story in complete shock. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The sun cast long golden beams through the high windows of the mansion, bathing the marble floors in warm light as Adrian Marlowe stepped through the front door. His Italian leather shoes clicked softly against the polished surface, the sound echoing through the grand foyer. He hadn't planned to return home so early. The board meeting had concluded unexpectedly ahead of schedule, and for once, he had declined the customary dinner with investors. A surprise for my girls, he thought with a smile, loosening his silk tie. Adrian was known throughout business circles for his sharp instincts and unwavering focus, qualities that had built his fortune from modest beginnings. At 43, he had everything most men dreamed of: wealth beyond measure, respect among peers, and what he valued most, a beautiful family waiting at home. The businessman set his briefcase down gently by the antique console table, careful not to make noise. His fingers brushed against a framed drawing, Clara's latest masterpiece, a colorful interpretation of their garden with 3 stick figures holding hands. The sight warmed his heart as he pictured his 6-year-old daughter's face lighting up when she saw him home early. Adrian inhaled deeply, detecting the faint scent of jasmine, Celine's preferred perfume. Perhaps his wife would be reading in the garden alcove, where afternoon light created the perfect reading nook. They had been married just 18 months, but Celine had seamlessly integrated into their lives, bringing a feminine touch to the mansion that had been missing since Clara's mother passed away. He moved through the west corridor, anticipating finding Clara in the sunroom. She loved spending afternoons there, surrounded by plants and natural light. Her crutches propped beside her as she colored or painted. The thought of her small hands working diligently over paper, tongue peeking out in concentration, made him quicken his pace. Little did he know that the scene awaiting him would shatter this perfect image forever. In moments, the life he had carefully constructed would crumble around him. The mansion, with all its grandeur and beauty, concealed secrets behind its ornate walls, secrets that would soon come crashing into the light. Adrian paused at the sound of voices ahead. Something in the tone made him hesitate, a sharpness that didn't belong in a home filled with love. His protective instincts flared as he moved forward, unaware that this ordinary Tuesday afternoon would become the dividing line in his life. Everything before this moment, and everything after. What he would witness in the next few seconds would haunt his dreams for years to come. A wound that no amount of wealth or success could ever heal. As Adrian Marlowe moved silently through the grand hallway of his mansion, his footsteps muffled by the plush carpet, anticipation bubbled within him. He had cut short his business trip specifically to surprise his family, imagining the delight on their faces when he appeared unexpectedly. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Then he heard it, a sharp cry followed by a thud. Adrian froze mid-step, his body tensing. The sound had come from the sunroom, just around the corner. Moving cautiously now, he approached the doorway and peered inside. What he witnessed in that moment would forever be seared into his memory, a scene that paralyzed him with horror and disbelief. There stood Celine, his new wife of barely 8 months, her face contorted with irritation. Before her stood Clara, his 6-year-old daughter, tears streaming down her small face. As Adrian watched, Celine deliberately lifted her foot and struck one of Clara's crutches, sending it clattering across the floor and causing the child to stumble precariously. "I told you to stay in your room," Celine hissed, her voice low but venomous. "Can't you do anything right?" The sight knocked the breath from Adrian's lungs. His fragile, vulnerable daughter, already burdened by her weak legs that necessitated the use of crutches, was being deliberately hurt in her own home, the very place where she should feel safest. Clara struggled to maintain her balance on one crutch, her tiny body trembling with the effort. Time seemed to stop. In that terrible moment, all of Adrian's success, all his wealth and business acumen, meant absolutely nothing. The protective father in him roared to life, a primal instinct overwhelming his usual composed demeanor. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles turning white with restraint. Clara hadn't noticed him yet, focused as she was on trying not to fall. Her golden hair hung in disarray around her tear-stained face, and the look of resigned fear in her eyes suggested this was not the first such incident. That realization hit Adrian like a physical blow. How long had this been happening in his absence? How many times had his daughter suffered while he was away closing deals and building his empire? The businessman who prided himself on noticing every detail had missed the most important one of all. The betrayal cut deeper than any business rival ever could. This was his child, his responsibility, and he had failed her in the most fundamental way possible. Clara Marlowe, with hair as bright as sunlight and eyes full of innocence, stumbled and shook as she struggled to regain her balance. Her small hands gripped the remaining crutch desperately, knuckles white with effort. The polished marble floor of the mansion, once a playground for her imagination, now seemed treacherously cold and unforgiving beneath her. Adrian watched, frozen in the doorway, as his daughter's face contorted with pain and fear. He had always prided himself on being meticulous, a man who anticipated market shifts before they happened, who calculated risks with precision, who protected his investments with unwavering vigilance. Yet here in his own home, he had failed to see the most obvious danger to his most precious treasure. "I'm sorry," the 6-year-old whispered, her voice barely audible as she tried to right herself. The apology, so automatic, so practiced, told Adrian everything he needed to know about how long this had been happening. Clara's soft whimper pierced the silence of the grand room, echoing off the high ceilings that had cost a fortune to design. The sound cut through Adrian more effectively than any business rival ever could. His little girl, who had already faced so many challenges with her weak legs, was now enduring cruelty from someone who should have been her protector. He noticed how she didn't cry out loudly, how she seemed to have learned to suffer quietly. The realization made his stomach turn. How many times had this happened while he was away, securing another deal, attending another meeting, expanding his empire? The child's eyes darted nervously toward Celine, then back to the floor, a behavior that spoke of repeated conditioning. Her small shoulders hunched forward, as if trying to make herself even smaller, less noticeable, less of a burden. At that moment, all of Adrian's business triumphs and wealth were rendered meaningless. The mansion, the cars, the investments, the respect of his peers. What value did any of it hold when compared to the pain etched across his daughter's face? The empire he had built with such determination now seemed hollow, built on the sacrifice of what truly mattered. Clara finally managed to steady herself, her fragile frame still trembling slightly. She didn't look up at her father, perhaps afraid of what she might see in his eyes. Instead, she focused on adjusting her grip on the crutch, a task she approached with the solemn determination only found in children who have grown up too quickly. Adrian felt something break inside him, not just his heart, but his entire understanding of what he had built and what he had lost while building it. Unaware of Adrian's presence, Celine Marlowe continued her tirade, her voice rising with each syllable. "You useless child! Look at this mess!" She gestured wildly at the small puddle of milk on the marble floor. "I've told you 1,000 times to be careful, but you never listen. You're nothing but a burden." Clara trembled, her small fingers gripping her crutches so tightly her knuckles turned white. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she tried to bend down to clean the spill, nearly losing her balance in the process. "Don't bother," Celine snapped, her perfectly manicured hand waving dismissively. "You'll only make it worse. Everything was perfect before you. This house, my life." Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "If only your father knew what a disappointment you really are." The cruelty in her stepmother's words hung in the air like poison. Clara's shoulders hunched forward as if trying to make herself smaller, invisible. This wasn't the first time the 6-year-old had endured such treatment, but Adrian had never witnessed it before. A white-hot rage coursed through his veins, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, trembling with the effort to maintain control. The businessman who commanded boardrooms with confidence now struggled to find his voice, shocked by the betrayal unfolding before him. "How dare you?" he finally managed, his words barely audible at first, then gaining strength. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way?" Celine whirled around, her face draining of color as she realized her husband stood in the doorway. For a moment, the grand room fell silent except for Clara's muffled sobs. "Adrian, I didn't hear you come in," she stammered, instantly transforming her expression into one of forced sweetness. "I was just teaching Clara to be more careful. You know how clumsy she can be with her condition." The mansion that had once echoed with genuine laughter now felt like a mockery of a home. The high ceilings and expensive furnishings that had represented success to Adrian suddenly seemed hollow, meaningless compared to the pain reflected in his daughter's eyes. "I heard everything," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I saw everything." The truth hung between them, impossible to deny or disguise. What had been hidden behind closed doors was now exposed in the harsh light of reality. The beautiful home had become a courtroom, and Celine stood condemned by her own actions and words. Clara looked up at her father, hope and fear mingling in her tear-filled eyes, silently begging for protection from the woman who should have loved her, but chose cruelty instead. Clara's eyes widened with recognition as she spotted her father standing in the doorway. Without hesitation, she stumbled toward Adrian Marlowe, her crutches clicking against the marble floor. Her small body trembled with each step, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks as she sought refuge from the storm that had become her daily reality. "Daddy," she whispered, the word barely audible as her arms wrapped around his legs with desperate strength. The businessman felt his heart fracture at the raw fear in his daughter's voice. A fear no 6-year-old should ever know, especially not in their own home. Adrian knelt down, gently lifting Clara into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her fragile frame fitting perfectly against his chest, as if designed to be protected there. Her golden hair tickled his chin as she buried her face in his shoulder, her small fingers clutching his suit jacket with surprising force. "It's all right now, sweetheart," he murmured, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other supported her weight. "I'm here. I've got you." His voice remained steady, despite the volcanic rage building inside him. A father's primal fury, tempered only by the need to comfort his child first. Clara's crutch lay abandoned on the floor where it had fallen, a stark reminder of his daughter's vulnerability and the betrayal that had occurred under his own roof. The sunlight streaming through the mansion's high windows seemed to mock the darkness of the moment, illuminating dust particles that danced, oblivious to the family fracturing beneath them. Across the room, Celine stood frozen, her posture stiffening as reality crashed down around her. The woman who had smiled so convincingly at their wedding now wore an expression Adrian had never seen before. Not remorse or shame, but the cold calculation of someone assessing damage control. "Adrian, I can explain," she began, taking a step forward. "Don't," he commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as he turned slightly, positioning himself between his wife and daughter. Clara's tears dampened his collar as she clung tighter, sensing the tension crackling in the air. Adrian looked directly into Celine's eyes, searching for any hint of the woman he thought he had married. Instead, he found only the fear of consequences, not sorrow for hurting Clara, but anxiety about facing repercussions for her actions. The realization settled like ice in his veins. Not another word, he continued, his protective embrace around Clara never wavering. Not another step. In that moment, cradling his trembling daughter, Adrian Marlowe, the man who had built empires and commanded boardrooms, understood with crystal clarity that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. And despite the heartbreak and betrayal, his only thought was ensuring Clara would never again know such fear in her father's home. The following hours unfolded like a nightmare Adrian Marlowe couldn't wake from. His hands trembled as he made the call to his attorney, voice barely steady enough to form coherent sentences. The businessman who commanded boardrooms with unwavering confidence now struggled to maintain his composure while his daughter clung to him, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his. "Pack your things and leave. Now." The words had erupted from him with a coldness he hadn't known he possessed. When Celine attempted to explain, her excuses falling hollow in the cavernous foyer, Adrian simply raised his hand. "There is nothing you could possibly say that would justify what I saw." The mansion, once a symbol of his success, now felt tainted. As Celine gathered her belongings under the watchful eye of the household staff, Clara remained nestled against her father's chest, her face hidden in the fabric of his expensive suit. The little girl didn't cry, her silence somehow more devastating than tears would have been. "I did everything for you," Celine hissed, as she dragged her suitcase toward the door. "Do you have any idea how difficult it is living with a child who—" "Enough." Adrian's voice cut through the air like steel. "You'll hear from my lawyers tomorrow." After Celine departed, an eerie quiet settled over the home. The staff moved like ghosts, unsure how to navigate the shattered atmosphere. Adrian dismissed them all for the evening, needing solitude with his daughter. As twilight approached, father and daughter found themselves sitting side by side on the wide marble staircase. Clara's crutches lay forgotten beside them as golden sunlight slipped across the polished floor, painting long shadows that seemed to reach toward them like accusing fingers. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I didn't know." Clara looked up at him, her innocent eyes reflecting a wisdom no 6-year-old should possess. "It's okay, Daddy." But it wasn't okay. Adrian felt the crushing weight of his failure pressing down on him. How had he not seen the signs? How many times had his daughter suffered while he was busy building his empire? The thought made his stomach twist with self-loathing. He gently brushed a strand of hair from Clara's face, noticing how she flinched slightly at his touch, a learned response that broke his heart anew. "Things will be different now," he promised, though he wasn't entirely sure how to make that true. "It's just you and me, and I will never let anyone hurt you again." As darkness settled over the mansion, Adrian knew with absolute certainty that his life had irrevocably changed. His priorities, once centered around business acquisitions and wealth accumulation, had crystallized into a single purpose: healing his daughter's wounded heart. Adrian Marlowe sat beside Clara's bed long after she had fallen asleep, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting shadows across the room that seemed to mirror the darkness in his heart. The weight of his failure pressed down on him like a physical burden. "How could I have been so blind?" he whispered to himself, careful not to wake his daughter. The businessman who prided himself on noticing every detail in multi-million-dollar contracts had somehow missed the suffering of his own child under his roof. For the next several days, Adrian's smartphone remained powered off. Board meetings were postponed, deals left unsigned, and his executive assistant was instructed to handle all but the most critical matters. The mansion that had once felt like a symbol of his success now seemed hollow, its grandeur mocking the emptiness of his priorities. Each morning, he helped Clara with her crutches, noticing how she flinched when he moved too quickly, a learned response to living in fear. During breakfast, he observed how she watched him cautiously before taking a bite, as if seeking permission. These small gestures spoke volumes about what she had endured. "You can eat whatever you want whenever you're hungry," he told her gently one morning, his voice breaking. "This is your home too." Clara looked up at him with those innocent eyes. "Even when you're not here?" she asked in a whisper that cut through him like a knife. Adrian knelt beside her chair, taking her small hands in his. "I'm not going anywhere for a long time," he promised. "And when I do, things will be different." As the days passed, Clara began to share fragments of her life with Celine. How she was made to eat alone in the kitchen when guests came over. How her stepmother would hide her crutches as punishment. How she learned to move silently through the mansion to avoid drawing attention. Each confession was a dagger to Adrian's heart. At night, after tucking Clara in, he would retreat to his study and weep silently, the guilt threatening to consume him. He had built an empire while his daughter lived in terror within the walls he had provided. "I will make this right," he vowed. Looking at a photograph of Clara as a toddler, her smile uninhibited by fear. Whatever it takes. The father realized that his wealth meant nothing if it couldn't protect what mattered most. As Clara slowly revealed the extent of her suffering, Adrian made a silent promise to rebuild not just their relationship, but her sense of safety and trust in the world, starting with himself. It took 3 days before Clara Marlowe began to speak about what had happened. Adrian sat with her in the sunroom, where the afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting gentle shadows across her small face. He waited patiently, allowing her the space to find her words. "Celine was different when you weren't home," Clara finally whispered, her fingers nervously tracing patterns on her drawing paper. "She said I was too slow and made too much noise with my crutches." Adrian felt his throat tighten, but maintained a calm expression. "What else, sweetheart?" The 6-year-old looked down at her lap. "Sometimes when you had business dinners, she wouldn't let me eat with the guests. She said my crutches would make everyone uncomfortable." Her voice trembled slightly. "I had to stay in my room until everyone left, even when I was really hungry." Each revelation was like a physical blow. The businessman who prided himself on anticipating every market shift had completely missed the suffering happening under his own roof. Clara continued, haltingly describing how Celine would criticize her drawings, calling them childish scribbles. How she'd sometimes hide one of her crutches as punishment for being too noisy or too slow. "She told me not to tell you," his daughter admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "She said you were too busy with important things and that you'd be disappointed in me for complaining." During these conversations, Adrian maintained his composure, asking gentle questions and reassuring Clara that none of this was her fault. But later, alone in his study, he would break down, shoulders heaving with silent sobs. The protective father was tormented by images of his child's suffering while he attended board meetings and closed million-dollar deals. One evening, after tucking Clara into bed, Adrian found a small notebook hidden beneath her mattress. Inside were childish drawings of a stick figure with crutches, alone in a room, while smiling adults gathered around a table. The simple illustration conveyed more pain than any words could express. "I promise you," he whispered to his sleeping daughter, brushing golden hair from her forehead, "nothing will ever be more important than you again." In that moment, Adrian Marlowe, whose name commanded respect in boardrooms across the country, made a silent vow. Wealth, status, business success, none of it mattered if it came at the expense of his child's happiness. The man who had built an empire realized he had neglected the most precious treasure of all, his daughter's trust. The mansion that once echoed with Clara Marlowe's giggles now stood in uncomfortable silence. For weeks after the incident, the 6-year-old barely spoke, her eyes downcast as she moved through the spacious halls with her crutches. Adrian noticed how she would flinch at sudden movements or sounds, her small body tensing as if preparing for another blow that would never come. "The trauma has created significant trust issues," explained Dr. Bennett, the child psychologist Adrian had carefully selected. "She's internalized the abuse and believes on some level that she deserved it." These words cut through Adrian like a knife. At night, after tucking his daughter into bed, he would retreat to his study and weep silently, the weight of his failure crushing his chest. How could he have been so blind? The businessman who prided himself on noticing every detail in multi-million-dollar contracts had missed the suffering happening under his own roof. Clara's recovery became Adrian's singular focus. He rearranged his entire schedule, delegating business responsibilities to attend every therapy session. The father learned techniques to help his daughter feel secure again, creating predictable routines that slowly rebuilt her sense of safety. "Daddy, will she come back?" Clara asked one evening, her voice barely audible as they sat in the garden. "No, sweetheart, never," Adrian promised, pulling her gently onto his lap. "It's just us now." Winters, Clara's teacher, became an unexpected ally in the healing process. The experienced educator suggested art therapy, noticing how the child seemed more relaxed with paintbrushes in hand. Soon, the mansion's refrigerator displayed a growing collection of watercolors, at first dark and chaotic, gradually evolving into brighter scenes. The rehabilitation sessions for her legs, once dreaded, became opportunities for bonding. Adrian would sit patiently, encouraging each small victory as his daughter worked to strengthen her muscles. "Look what I can do!" she exclaimed one day, taking 3 steps without her crutches before reaching for support. Adrian's heart swelled with pride and hope. "That's amazing, my brave girl." Family friends who had passed Adrian's careful vetting began visiting, bringing gentle energy into the home. Slowly, tentatively, Clara's smile returned, first as fleeting moments, then lingering longer each time. 4 months after Celine's departure, Adrian heard something that brought tears to his eyes. Clara's laughter, genuine and unrestrained, floating up from the sunroom where she played with her cousin. The sound, once taken for granted, now represented a precious milestone on their journey. Like delicate spring blooms after harsh winter, Clara was gradually coming back to life. With gentle persistence, Adrian Marlowe encouraged Clara to return to the activities she once loved. Painting, which had always been her sanctuary, became a window into her healing process. In the sunlit corner of the mansion's sunroom, he created a special space filled with canvases, brushes, and vibrant paints. "Would you like to paint something today?" he asked one morning, his voice soft with hope. Clara nodded hesitantly, her small fingers reaching for a brush. The first paintings were dark, shadowy figures and muted colors that reflected her inner turmoil. Adrian's heart ached as he watched, but he remained steadfast in his support. Week by week, splashes of yellow began appearing in her artwork, then blues and greens. By the 3rd month, her canvases bloomed with color, mirroring the gradual return of joy to her spirit. The therapist, a kind woman with patient eyes, worked with Clara twice weekly. During these sessions, Adrian never left her side, watching as his daughter took tentative emotional steps forward, just as challenging as her physical ones. "You're doing wonderfully," he whispered, during a particularly difficult session when tears streamed down her face as she spoke about feeling unwanted. The little girl gripped her father's hand tightly. "Will you always be here?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Every single day," he promised, meaning it with every fiber of his being. At home, they established new rituals. Bedtime stories became sacred moments where they built worlds of imagination together. Breakfast conversations grew longer and filled with laughter. The mansion, once a showcase of wealth, transformed into a true home where Clara felt safe to express herself. One evening, as Adrian tucked his daughter into bed, she showed him her newest painting, a figure that was unmistakably him, standing tall beside a smaller figure with golden hair. "That's us," she explained, pointing to the bright sun above them in the picture. Adrian felt something profound shift within him as he studied the artwork. "Clara," he said, "you've taught me something I never understood before." She looked up curiously. Children don't just need protection from dangers outside. They need someone inside their home who chooses love every single day. He brushed her hair gently from her forehead. "I promise to be that person for you always." That night, as Clara slept peacefully for the first time in months, Adrian stood in the doorway, watching her. The businessman who had built an empire realized that his most important construction project was rebuilding his daughter's sense of safety and trust, a foundation far more valuable than any mansion could ever be. The mansion that had once felt like a museum, pristine but hollow, gradually transformed into a true home. Over the months following Celine's departure, Adrian Marlowe deliberately filled every corner with elements of joy and comfort. The grand hallways that had echoed with Clara's quiet sobs now resonated with her giggles as she and her father played impromptu games of hide-and-seek between the marble columns. "Daddy, look what I made!" Clara would call out, her voice growing stronger with each passing day. The sunroom, once a place of tension, became her artistic sanctuary, its walls now adorned with dozens of her colorful paintings, each one a testament to her healing spirit. Adrian had redesigned parts of the mansion to accommodate his daughter's needs. The intimidating marble staircase now featured a custom-built lift that Clara could operate independently, giving her freedom to move between floors without struggling with her crutches. The businessman found himself measuring success not in quarterly profits, but in the growing confidence on his little girl's face. During important board meetings, Adrian would often pause mid-sentence, his attention drawn to a framed crayon drawing propped on his desk. His colleagues noticed how his expression would soften instantly, the hard-edged negotiator momentarily replaced by a father lost in thought. What they couldn't see was how that simple artwork, a stick figure of Clara holding hands with a taller stick figure, had become his compass, realigning his priorities whenever business threatened to consume him. The kitchen, previously the domain of hired staff, became a place of shared experiences. Though neither father nor daughter possessed remarkable culinary skills, their weekend pancake-making adventures created more laughter than edible results. The household staff, initially bewildered by flour-covered countertops and eggshells on the floor, soon joined in these moments. The formal employer-employee dynamic melting away. Evening rituals emerged organically. After dinner, they would sit together in the library, Adrian reading stories while Clara nestled against him, her crutches propped nearby but temporarily forgotten. Sometimes they simply talked, the child gradually sharing more of her thoughts and dreams without fear of judgment. "Will we always be this happy?" Clara asked one evening as twilight painted the mansion in soft hues. The question caught Adrian off guard. He looked down at his daughter's expectant face, remembering the broken child he'd discovered months ago. "I can't promise always," he answered honestly, "but I can promise I'll spend every day trying to make sure you are." In the quiet moments before Clara's bedtime, Adrian often found himself marveling at how his massive, empty house had finally become what wealth alone could never buy, a home filled with love. Adrian Marlowe sat alone in his expansive office, surrounded by awards and accolades that once defined his worth. The glass wall before him offered a panoramic view of the city he had conquered through shrewd business deals and relentless ambition. Yet, as he swiveled in his leather chair, his eyes lingered not on the skyline, but on a colorful drawing pinned prominently among his financial reports, a crayon masterpiece by Clara. The businessman ran his fingers through his hair, contemplating how drastically his definition of success had shifted. Just months ago, closing multi-million-dollar deals and expanding his empire had consumed his every waking moment. His calendar had been packed with board meetings and international flights, leaving precious little time for what truly mattered. "What good is all this?" he whispered to the empty room, gesturing at the trappings of wealth surrounding him. "If I can't protect my own daughter?" He picked up a framed photo from his desk, Clara smiling tentatively during their recent visit to the garden. The healing process had been slow, but her eyes held a spark that had been absent in those dark days after he discovered Celine's cruelty. The memory still made his stomach clench with anger and guilt. Adrian had begun restructuring his business operations, delegating responsibilities he once insisted on handling personally. His executive team had been surprised, shocked even, when he announced he would no longer be available for evening meetings or weekend emergency calls. Some board members had questioned his commitment, but for the first time in his career, their approval meant nothing compared to being home for Clara's dinner time. "Success," he murmured, tracing his daughter's face in the photograph, "is seeing you smile again." He had built an empire of glass and steel, accumulated wealth beyond measure, and earned respect throughout the business world. Yet none of it compared to the wealth found in Clara's laughter or the pride he felt watching her progress in therapy. The father had come to understand that his most important title wasn't CEO or founder. It was simply Dad. Adrian closed his laptop decisively. The quarterly reports could wait until tomorrow. Today, he had promised Clara they would bake cookies together, a messy endeavor that the old Adrian would have delegated to household staff. But now flour-covered countertops and imperfectly shaped cookies represented a new kind of achievement. As he stood to leave, he glanced once more at the city skyline. His buildings might shape the horizon, but it was his daughter who had reshaped his heart. No business success could ever compare to the richness of their healing bond. The summer sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the mansion, casting golden patterns across the polished marble floor. It had been nearly 8 months since that fateful day when Adrian Marlowe discovered the truth about his wife. The mansion felt different now, warmer somehow, despite having one less occupant. Adrian sat in the garden, reviewing documents from his latest business venture, when he heard the sliding door open. Clara Marlowe appeared, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. The little girl paused at the threshold, her small hands gripping her crutches with determination rather than dependency. "Daddy," she called, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Watch me." Adrian set aside his papers immediately, giving his daughter his complete attention, a habit he'd cultivated religiously since that terrible day. What happened next made his breath catch in his throat. Clara carefully positioned her crutches against the doorframe. With a deep breath that lifted her tiny shoulders, she took one tentative step forward. Then another. Her legs, usually so unreliable, seemed to find new strength as she walked, slowly but steadily, across the stone patio toward her father. "I've been practicing," she explained, her face flushed with effort and pride. "With Miss Emily during therapy." Adrien remained frozen, afraid that any movement might break the spell of this miraculous moment. His daughter, who had endured not only the challenge of her physical condition but also the trauma of abuse, was walking toward him without assistance. 6 steps, 7, 8. When her balance faltered slightly, Adrien instinctively moved forward, but Clara shook her head. "I can do it, Daddy," she insisted, her determination evident in the set of her small jaw, a determination that reminded him so much of himself. The businessman who commanded boardrooms and managed millions felt tears gathering in his eyes. This simple act of courage from his 6-year-old daughter outshone any business achievement he'd ever accomplished. When Clara finally reached him, having crossed nearly 15 feet of patio without her crutches, she collapsed into his waiting arms, breathless and triumphant. "Did you see?" she asked, her eyes searching his face for approval. I saw everything, Adrian whispered, gathering his daughter close. You're incredible, Clara. As he held her, feeling her heart racing with exertion and pride against his chest, Adrian knew this moment would be forever etched in his memory, not as the wealthy entrepreneur, but as a father witnessing his daughter's indomitable spirit overcoming both physical limitations and emotional wounds. In that radiant summer afternoon, their healing journey took its most significant step forward yet. Clara Marlowe looked up at her father, her face glowing with determination. The sunlight streaming through the mansion windows caught in her hair, creating a halo effect around her small frame. She had just taken several steps with minimal support from her crutches, a milestone that seemed impossible only months ago. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice soft yet resolute. "I want to be strong." Her eyes, once dimmed by fear, now sparkled with newfound purpose. "Not because I have to be, but because I want to walk with you." She reached for his hand, her tiny fingers wrapping around his. Into brighter days, together. Adrian felt his composure crumble. This child, who had endured more suffering than any 6-year-old should ever know, stood before him not as a victim, but as a warrior. The businessman who commanded boardrooms with unwavering confidence now found himself completely undone by his daughter's simple declaration. He knelt down on the polished floor of their home, bringing himself to her eye level. Tears flowed freely down his face, and for once, he made no attempt to hide them. The mansion that had once been a place of hidden pain now witnessed this raw moment of healing between father and daughter. "Clara," he said, his voice breaking with emotion, "you are already the strongest person I have ever known." He gently cupped her face in his hands. "Stronger than anyone in my company, stronger than me." The little girl tilted her head, clearly puzzled by this assessment. "But you don't need crutches," she pointed out, glancing down at her assistive devices. "Strength isn't about walking without help," Adrian explained, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's about continuing forward even when the path is difficult. It's about finding your smile again after tears." Clara considered this for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Then she leaned forward and wiped a tear from her father's cheek, a gesture so tender it nearly broke him all over again. "Then we're both strong," she decided with the simple wisdom of childhood. Adrian pulled his daughter into a gentle embrace, careful not to disturb her balance. In that moment, he understood that true wealth had nothing to do with the mansion surrounding them or the empire he had built. It existed in this fragile yet unbreakable bond between them, a connection that Celine's cruelty had failed to destroy. "Yes," he whispered into her hair, "we are both strong, and we'll keep getting stronger together." The transformation happened so gradually that Adrian Marlowe barely noticed it at first. What had begun as a horrific discovery, a moment that shattered his world into jagged pieces, was slowly being reshaped into something unexpected. Pain remained, certainly, but alongside it grew something far more powerful: resilience. Clara's progress in therapy had been remarkable. Her therapist often commented that children possess an extraordinary capacity for healing when surrounded by genuine love and support. Adrian watched in awe as his daughter, once withdrawn and fearful, began to reclaim her childhood. Her laughter, once so rare, now echoed through the mansion halls with increasing frequency. "Dad, look," she called one afternoon, showing him a painting she'd created, a bright yellow sun rising over mountains, with 2 figures holding hands beneath it. "That's us," she explained, pointing to the figures. "We're climbing together." The simple artwork brought tears to Adrian's eyes. The businessman who once measured success in acquisitions and profit margins now found his greatest achievement in his daughter's smile. The painting soon occupied a place of honor in his office, where board members couldn't help but notice it during meetings. On particularly difficult days, when Clara struggled with her exercises, or when memories of Celine's cruelty surfaced unexpectedly. Adrian would sit beside her on the marble staircase, the same spot where they had huddled together that fateful day, and remind her of how far they had come. "Your courage amazes me every day," he told her one evening as they sat watching the sunset through the mansion's western windows. "You've taught me what real strength looks like." Clara leaned against her father's shoulder. "I'm only brave because you're here," she whispered. But Adrian knew better. His daughter's resilience had become his guiding light, illuminating a path forward he never would have found alone. Her ability to trust again, to find joy despite her painful past, inspired him to look beyond their private healing. In quiet moments, while Clara slept, Adrian began researching organizations supporting children with physical disabilities and those who had experienced abuse. He made calls, arranged meetings, and started envisioning ways to channel their painful experience into something meaningful for others. "We can help other kids like me, can't we?" Clara asked one morning, surprising Adrian with her perceptiveness. He nodded, throat tight with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. I think that's exactly what we're meant to do." What had begun with betrayal was transforming into purpose. The wealthy businessman and his resilient daughter were finding their way forward, not by forgetting the past, but by using it to create something beautiful from the broken pieces. Adrian Marlowe found himself standing in the gleaming marble lobby of the newly established Clara Marlowe Center for Pediatric Rehabilitation. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the colorful murals depicting children of all abilities playing together. The businessman ran his fingers along the dedication plaque, feeling the engraved letters of his daughter's name beneath his touch. "Mr. Marlowe, the first families will be arriving tomorrow," announced the center's director, approaching with clipboard in hand. The father nodded, his eyes misting slightly. What had begun as a single donation had blossomed into something far greater. In the 18 months since that fateful afternoon when he discovered Celine's cruelty, Adrian had channeled his pain and guilt into purpose. He established a foundation dedicated to supporting children with physical disabilities and their families. "I want no child to feel what Clara felt," he explained to his board of directors when announcing his new philanthropic direction. Many questioned his sudden shift in business priorities, but Adrian remained resolute. The wealth he'd accumulated meant nothing compared to the smile that had returned to his daughter's face. The rehabilitation center was just the beginning. Adrian created scholarship funds for medical students specializing in pediatric physical therapy. He funded research into innovative mobility devices and sponsored summer camps where children like Clara could feel accepted and celebrated. "Daddy, can I show you something?" Clara asked one evening as they sat in the garden of their mansion. At 7 years old now, she moved with growing confidence, though still relying on her crutches for longer distances. She led him to her room, where dozens of thank you letters and drawings from children benefiting from this foundation were carefully arranged on her wall. "These are my friends," she explained proudly. "They say you helped them too." Adrian knelt beside his daughter, overwhelmed by emotion. The businessman who once measured success in profit margins and market share now saw the true measure of his life's work in these simple crayon drawings. "You taught me this," he whispered to Clara, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You showed me what really matters." His office. Adrian kept a small painting Clara had made. A simple image of 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. It reminded him daily that true wealth wasn't stored in bank accounts, but in the hearts of those we protect and nurture. With each rehabilitation center opened, each scholarship awarded, each child helped, Adrian's mission grew stronger. He had learned through heartbreak that compassion was the only currency that truly mattered in this world. Adrian Marlowe's name began appearing in charity newsletters and on donor walls across rehabilitation centers. But these public acknowledgments meant little compared to the quiet victories happening within his mansion's walls. While his wealth had once been directed toward business acquisitions and luxury, it now flowed toward organizations supporting children with physical disabilities and their families. On a crisp autumn morning, Clara sat in the garden sketching with colored pencils while her father reviewed documents for his newest foundation. He glanced up frequently, watching sunlight dance across her focused expression. The businessman found himself measuring success differently now, not in profit margins or market shares, but in the growing confidence behind his daughter's smile. "Dad, look!" Clara called, holding up her artwork. The drawing showed two figures, one tall, one small, standing before what appeared to be a building with a rainbow above it. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he replied, setting aside his papers. "What is it?" "It's us at the new center you're building," she explained, her voice carrying a certainty that hadn't existed months before. "The rainbow means it's a happy place." Adrian crossed the garden and knelt beside her chair, emotion tightening his throat. This simple drawing captured everything that mattered: hope, healing, and their unbreakable bond. The center she referred to would soon provide therapy and support for dozens of children like her. At board meetings, Adrian now spoke with passionate conviction about protecting vulnerable children. His personal experience transformed him from a distant benefactor into a compelling advocate. Business associates who had once known him only for his shrewd negotiations now witnessed a man driven by deeper purpose. "The true measure of our society," he often said during speeches, "isn't in our economic achievements, but in how we safeguard our children's hearts." Clara's progress continued steadily. The therapists who visited the mansion remarked on her resilience, noting how she'd transformed trauma into determination. Adrian kept a journal documenting these small victories, the first time she laughed without restraint after the incident, her growing independence with the crutches, the day she confidently introduced herself to a new tutor. Each evening, father and daughter shared quiet moments on the marble staircase, the same spot where they had sat together on that life-changing day. Sometimes they talked about their day. Other times, they simply enjoyed each other's presence in comfortable silence. For Adrian, these moments represented his greatest wealth. The mansion, once a showcase of his financial success, had transformed into something far more valuable, a sanctuary where a child's spirit could heal and flourish. This, he knew with absolute certainty, was his most important legacy. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support allows us to continue creating stories that remind us of humanity's deepest values: love, resilience, and the strength to protect the innocent. Adrian never forgot the day he came home early. That single moment of horror became the pivotal turning point that changed everything for his family. The businessman often reflected on how differently life might have unfolded had he arrived home at his usual time. Clara might have endured years more suffering in silence, her spirit gradually crushed beneath Celine's cruelty. Sometimes our greatest pain becomes our most profound teacher. Adrian once shared during a charity fundraiser for children with disabilities. The wealthy father had transformed his guilt into purpose, establishing rehabilitation centers where children like Clara could heal both physically and emotionally. The mansion that once echoed with his daughter's quiet sobs now rang with her laughter. The marble staircase where they had sat together in shock became the place where Clara practiced her strengthening exercises, each step a victory celebrated with her father's encouraging smile. What Adrian learned through this ordeal transcended the walls of their home. He recognized that true wealth wasn't measured in his company's quarterly profits or the accolades he received, but in the trust reflected in his daughter's eyes when she looked at him. The businessman who once measured success in financial statements now counted it in his child's smiles. Clara's paintings, once dark and confined, now exploded with color and possibility. Her artwork hung proudly in Adrian's office, reminding him during stressful board meetings of what truly mattered. His colleagues noticed the change in him, how he would pause mid-sentence to answer a call from his daughter, how he left meetings early to attend her therapy sessions. The father and daughter created new traditions together. Sunday mornings were reserved for pancakes and storytelling. Wednesday evenings became their time for stargazing from the garden, where Clara would name constellations and Adrian would listen, marveling at her knowledge and resilience. "The moment I saw Celine hurt Clara changed everything," he confided to a close friend. "It wasn't just about removing the danger, it was about building something better from the ruins." And build they did, a relationship founded on trust, a home centered on kindness, and a future illuminated by hope. For Adrian Marlowe, that fateful early return home became the line dividing his life into before and after. The pain never fully disappeared, but it transformed into wisdom that guided every decision he made thereafter. In protecting Clara, he had found his true purpose. The mansion that had once felt hollow now resonated with genuine warmth. Adrian Marlowe had transformed not just the physical space, but the emotional atmosphere that permeated every room. Through countless tears shed in private moments, through acknowledging his mistakes, and through embracing the difficult journey of healing, he had created something precious with his daughter. "Dad, look!" Clara called out one afternoon, her bright eyes shining as she displayed her latest painting, a colorful depiction of two figures holding hands beneath a radiant sun. The artwork now adorned the walls that had once displayed only expensive acquisitions. Her creative expressions had become the most valuable treasures in their home. The businessman who had once measured success by financial statements now found himself recalibrating his entire value system. When associates commented on his changed priorities, Adrian merely smiled. The board meetings could wait. His daughter's recitals could not. "Kindness isn't something we practice occasionally," he often told Clara during their evening talks on the marble staircase, the very spot where they had sat together on that life-changing day. "It's how we choose to live every single moment." Clara nodded, understanding far more than most children her age. Her experiences had given her wisdom beyond her years, yet her father had worked tirelessly to preserve her childhood joy. The 6-year-old still giggled when tickled and still believed in magic, testaments to Adrian's success in protecting what mattered most. Together, they established new traditions. Sunday mornings were reserved for pancakes and planning their weekly adventures. Wednesday evenings became their time for sharing stories about acts of kindness they had witnessed or performed. These simple rituals anchored them in their new reality. The rehabilitation centers Adrian funded helped many children like Clara, but his greatest achievement remained the healing that happened within their own home. His daughter had progressed remarkably with her mobility, but her emotional resilience impressed him even more. To the outside world, Adrian remained the powerful millionaire whose business acumen commanded respect in boardrooms across the country. His wealth continued to grow, his influence expanded, and his reputation as a shrewd businessman remained intact. But Clara knew different. She knew her father as the man who still checked under her bed for monsters, who learned to braid her hair despite his clumsy fingers, who listened to her fears without judgment. She knew him as the person who had chosen her over everything else when it mattered most. "The richest man isn't the one with the most money," Adrian often reflected as he watched his daughter sleeping peacefully. "It's the one who has learned what truly matters." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the marble staircase where their journey of healing had begun, Adrian Marlowe watched his daughter Clara practicing her steps with determination etched across her face. The mansion that had once echoed with silent suffering now resonated with purpose and hope. Their story, painful as its beginning had been, carried a message that deserved to be shared. Every child deserves protection, Every child deserves to be heard. These weren't just platitudes to Adrian anymore. They were the foundation upon which he had rebuilt his life and his relationship with his daughter. The businessman who once measured success in acquisitions and profit margins now found his greatest achievement in the smile that had returned to Clara's face. "Watch me, Dad," Clara called out, taking 3 steps without her crutches before carefully lowering herself onto a cushioned bench. Her golden hair caught the last rays of sunlight as she beamed with pride. "I'm watching, sweetheart," Adrian replied, his heart swelling. "You're incredible." The journey hadn't been easy. There were nights when Clara would wake screaming from nightmares, days when progress seemed impossible, and moments when Adrian questioned whether the wounds would ever truly heal. But they persevered together, father and daughter, choosing love every single day. Through therapy sessions and quiet conversations, through painting sessions and gentle physical rehabilitation, they had forged something beautiful from their pain. The mansion that had once been merely a symbol of wealth had transformed into a true home, a sanctuary where Clara knew she was safe, valued, and deeply loved. Adrian often reflected on that fateful afternoon when he had come home early. The horror of what he had witnessed had changed everything, but from that darkness had emerged a profound truth. Love wasn't just about providing material comfort or opportunities. It was about protection, presence, and unwavering support. As Clara grew stronger, both physically and emotionally, Adrian's commitment to protecting vulnerable children extended beyond their home. The rehabilitation centers he funded, the scholarships he established, and the awareness he raised all stemmed from one simple belief: that every child deserved what Clara now had: safety, love, and the courage to speak their truth. Before we end, I'd love for you to leave a special comment below. Write, "Every child deserves love." If you believe no child should ever suffer in silence, the journey of Adrian and Clara is a powerful reminder that every child needs and deserves protection, compassion, and the space to be heard. Their story stands as a testament to the healing power of love and the unbreakable bond between a parent and child who choose each other every day above all else.